Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Security Repo podcast. We're here with a fantastic guest, Abraham Aranguren. Now, Abraham has over 22 years experience in IT, 15 years specifically in security. He is the CEO of 7A Security. It's a company specializing in penetration testing of web and mobile applications, infrastructure, code review, and also has some pretty impressive training resources. He's a co-author of the mobile and web desktop 7A security courses. He's been a security trainer at Black Hat, Hack in the Box, OWASP Global, and many, many more other conferences that are top tier. I'm going to stop reading the bio now because Abraham has about 450 different certifications and things, so I won't read them all out, but you just have to believe me that he's the real deal. So, Abraham, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
I did want to call out as well, thanks for being here, but you're also the project leader for OWTF, the OWASP project. It's a flagship project, so I don't know why you didn't put that on your slide, because that our community absolutely loves OWASP, and you're very glad that you're here for it about that.
Yeah, thank you about that. Yeah, I think there's a slide for that in a second, so it will be covered. But yeah, thank you for having me, and yeah, let's get started maybe.
Yeah, let's dive straight into it. So you're here. You're going to tell us all why we should do a pen test. Take it away.
This is an interesting talk, right? Because there's a lot of confusion on this topic, so it tries to clear all this up, right? So let's talk about it, right? So first, the main objective of this brief talk is about why you need a manual pen test, right? Like a real pen test, and I'll explain what that is and so on, right? So I'll briefly go into the who am I, that I'll keep it short as I have already been introduced, and then I'll show you a little bit about the public pen test reports, 14 reasons why you need a manual pen test performed by humans and not other things that people call pen tests but are not pen tests, other considerations about automation, bug bounties, and cheap quote-unquote pen tests, and then a case study of one of our customers as illustration of the benefits of having a manual pen test, but like with actual numbers, right? Like no hearsay or anything like that, but actual metrics of how security can improve, right? So yeah, we talked already about this. These are the certifications. So the short of this is that I was a developer first, and then I switched to security. So this explains the variety in certifications. And my employer at the time was paying for most of this. I think I only paid for one or two in the entire list. So yeah, that's kind of the story. And yeah, I'm the founder and one of the project leaders of OWASP OWTF, which Dwayne was talking about. And this is an OWASP flagship project. So if you type owtf.org in your browser, that takes you to the project page, right? So now another fun way to learn about security is to read public pen test reports, right? So sometimes we are allowed to publish this, and this is like completely free, right? So you can go here to Certain Security Publications, and you will see a lot of public pen test reports. You just click on it, and you get the PDF. You don't need to register. It's completely free. You can do this for any security company that publishes public pen test reports. And then
for the people listening, I just wanted to say, for the people listening, I'm going to put links to a lot of these pen test reports in the show notes. So if you're interested in finding out and looking at some public pen test reports, you can find them wherever you're watching or listening to this. Sorry, Abraham, just wanted to throw that in there.
Feel free to interject whenever. But yeah, that is, it's like it can be used in multiple ways, right? So for example, if you're learning about security, you can use it to learn about what people tend to find in mobile applications, web applications, cloud audits, supply chain audits, threat models, fuzzing, right? So you can try to learn about security that way. If you are a developer, you can, let's say you are an Android developer, so you can look for public pen test reports on Android applications and try to learn about how to secure your Android application that way. Or if you are a web developer, you can look at web developer, web audits, pen test reports, and then that can also be used as a learning resource. And of course, another reason why you might want to do this is to vet a little bit the company that you work with, right? So we have a quality guarantee, which is unheard of in security, where we are obliged ourselves to deliver at the level of quality of the public pen test reports. And if that's not the case, we will keep working on the test for free until those quality standards are met, right? So that's also like another thing to consider. But anyway, so these are some of, from this year, we audited K9 Mail, which is the new Thunderbird for Android. We did this for Mozilla. Argo VPN is for Iranian citizens to be able to navigate to the free internet or the Western internet, where you still see what Google and Facebook want you to see, but it's better than what the Iranian government wants you to see, right? BridgeFi is pretty cool concept of talking to each other, like tunneling messages through each other using Bluetooth in case of an internet shutdown. Let's say if the entire city of New York goes out of power, the cell phone towers after 30 minutes or so will run out of power because the UPS batteries will be gone. And then people will have like no way to communicate, right? So with this application, you can actually talk to each other. And I'm happy to say that we found many problems, but the actual tunneling of Bluetooth messaging through each other, that was actually safe because they were using Leap Signal for that. So yeah, and there's like a lot of other projects. I gave a talk about Leave Home Safe at DeepSec last year, so that's also an interesting one as a COVID-19 contact tracing application, kind of enforced / mandated, not fully mandated, but kind of enforced in Hong Kong. So we did an audit of that, and we found a lot of security problems and so on, right? So just to mention that, and there's like a bunch of other pen test reports. There's some about Smart Sheriff, which was an application in Korea, supposedly to protect children, but it was really bad. So it was so bad that we even gave a talk about it called Smart Sheriff Dumb Idea. You can search it on YouTube. And then Chinese police and cloud pets. You can also search this on YouTube. I gave this talk at a few places. So this is about the applications that the Chinese use to control the small Muslim minorities in a region of China called Xinjiang. And then Study the Great Nation is a concept of granting you points the more you know about the great leader of China. And then with those points, you can do cool stuff in China, right? So that's kind of the idea of that. And cloud pets were some toys that we checked for security, and it was pretty bad, right? So yeah, that's all covered in that presentation. Anyway, and there's a bunch of other public pen test reports. So yeah, let's jump into it. So for 3 reasons why you need a manual pen test, right? So many people, especially entrepreneurs and CEOs that don't know much about security, believe that automated security tools can completely protect software, right? So this benefits 2 groups, right? It benefits vendors to sell ineffective products and services, and cyber criminals to exploit these issues for fun and profit, right? But anybody in security know this, right? They know that every automated tool will have false positives and false negatives, right? So false positives are a waste of your time and money as your staff reads and tries to understand and mitigate bullshit findings, right? So these are basically false positives are fake findings that every automated tool has, right? So when you run the tool, yes, maybe the tool is even free and open source, but you still need to pay someone to go through those results. And if half of those results are bullshit and it takes like a lot of time to go through the results, then you're actually losing time and money for that, right? And they also have false negatives, which leave your systems wide open to existing vulnerabilities that the automated tools fail to find, right? So these 2 problems are very well known to every security professional. There's actually, I don't think any security professional would want to challenge me on this. And I'm going to elaborate on why this happens in the next points, right? So, but let's take a step back and take a deep breath and think more about this, right? So if automation was enough, why would large companies with huge budgets like Google and Facebook use the following on top of automation, right? So Google and Facebook, they have their own internal, they have huge in-house security teams, lots of expertise. They use a lot of automation, but they also hire pen tests performed by external companies, and they also implement bug bounty programs on top of everything else, right? So why is that? The only explanation is that automation can help, it's useful. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it, you should, but it is not sufficient, right? So automation can help and it will help, but you need more than that, right? So this is what this presentation is about. So let's talk about the 14 reasons why you need a manual pen test, right? So the first one is vulnerabilities hiding behind complexity, right? So most dynamic automated tools will completely fail to reach vulnerable endpoints in scenarios like the date is only valid if the user is more than 18 years old. There's an invalid parameter or parameter combination. So you have a Spanish postcode for a UK address, and then the validation for this is failing. Therefore, you don't reach the endpoint. Therefore, you will never find the vulnerability, right? As an automated tool that is like blindly like sending a lot of nonsense to the application to trying to find problems, right? Sometimes there's even required multi-step sequences prior to the vulnerable endpoint. So automated tools are really bad at stuff like this, like when you have to send like 3 API requests until you end the final endpoint where the vulnerability is, right? So the whole point of this is if you cannot reach the vulnerable endpoint as an automated tool, you are done, right? You will never find the vulnerability because you cannot even code, right? You cannot even reach that functionality. By the way, the tool fails to detect if the user is logged out, right? This is a very typical one that will happen as automated tools try to send like a bunch of requests. Eventually, they will be either logged out or the session will be locked or something, and the tool will not realize it, and it will keep like trying to find XSS, SQL injection, and other things. But those tests will actually not work. They will never reach the application because the user is effectively logged out, right? Or the tool triggers throttling or blocking mechanisms, right? So all these are typical scenarios why automated tools miss security problems, right? And another problem is with static analysis tools, right? So static analysis tools will fare really poorly when frameworks and applications generate code on the fly. So if you have dynamically generated code, then this will be likely completely missed by automated scanning, because it's very difficult for the automated scanner to go through that and figure out what the dynamic code is going to be, right? So these are some examples, right? Another example is logic flaws, right? And this is kind of what I always say is the future of security, because like frameworks are getting better at protecting from traditional vulnerabilities like XSS, SQL injection. Now you have escaping by default, bind variables by default in a lot of frameworks. But logic flaws, you have to have the logic there, which is like specific to the company, specific to the product that's developed, right? So logic flaws are pretty much impossible to find for both static and dynamic analysis tools, because they are like very specific to the business, right? They are not a clear string concatenation doing something dangerous or something like obvious like that, right? And here I'm just going to show like some examples, right? So in this case, like this guy found a logic flaw and got like $10,000 from Facebook because he was able to get your Facebook private friend list by registering a new Facebook account using the victim's phone number and then navigated to the update contact info instead of confirming the SMS code, right? So this type of issue, as you read it, is impossible, right, for an automated tool to find, right? An automated tool will not have the brains so far, right? We will know with AI what happens, but so far, I don't know any automated tool that will find something like this.
We had there was a good example of this a couple of weeks ago when they were talking about Coinbase, when they were able to using the Coinbase API, they were able to transfer Ethereum, which is around about $2,000 for one Ethereum, into Bitcoin, which is $44,000. So basically, as they describe it, turning pesos into pounds, because the logic wasn't there to check. Did you have 2 units? But they didn't check of what. Logic flaws like this, and automated tools don't understand. They don't know what you're trying to do, right? So for them, it's that works, right?
Yeah. It's very complicated for automated tools to find stuff like that, and this is the value of one of the strong reasons why you need a manual pen test, right? And then another one is information disclosure, right? Maybe the tool is trying to find XSS and it gets back the full list of users or something crazy like that, but because it was trying XSS and it didn't get XSS, it moves on, right? Whereas a manual tester would see that and say, hey, this is really bad, right? Like this information should not be readable. So this is another example of, stuff like that. And in this case, we have like here another example, like Like this guy got, uploaded a GIF image that allowed him to read like random server memory, which is like an obscure form of information leak that would actually be quite difficult to find for an automated tool as well, right? And he also got like 10K from Facebook for this, right? So I'm just going to show like a few examples of this. Another one would be authorization flaws, right? So this is also like, should user A really be able to see or access X, right? So authorization flaws are another type of logic bug, right? So humans can answer that, but tools really can't, right? So in this case, this is another example. Again, Facebook authorization flaw. The guy got 27K. He found like he could add himself as an admin to any business and take over any business account and so on, right? So there's a lot of stuff like this. Then business logic errors, right? So for example, its business is unique and it must conform to business requirements. So will a negative purchase be a refund, right? So humans can try to bypass business logic, but tools really can't, right? So this guy got 1,000 for finding a vulnerability where he could abuse pricing errors in saved carts in Shopify 7, right? And Shopify is pretty popular and widely used, right? So even, systems like Facebook and Shopify, things like that, there's lots of issues that have been found over the years, right? Then there's subtle injection attacks, right? So injection attacks confuse attacker-supplied data with instructions. Normally, you're going to have a string concatenation. The only exception to this would be NoSQL injection. But in most cases, you will have like some form of a string concatenation of user input on one hand, and another hand you have instructions. Then you merge them together with a string concatenation, and then you no longer know what is code and what is instructions because it's all merged, right? So static analysis automation can find some forms of injection, but not always, particularly not when the vulnerable code is dynamically generated, right? That's where static analysis tools will really struggle with any sort of dynamically generated code. So in this case, there's a bug bounty of 10K for a command injection vulnerability in SEMrush, which allowed remote code execution by Franz Rosen using a logo upload, right? So yeah, there's a lot of things like this where you would not maybe expect that uploading a logo would result in remote code execution with command injection, right? So there's things like this where sometimes it's like not so obvious, right? Also subtle injection attacks. Then there's API implementation flaws, right? So APIs are extremely hard for automated tools to test because trial and error is often required to invoke all endpoints properly. In fact, when we have a pen test, the first thing we ask for is to provide the open API, Swagger, Postman, or equivalent form of API. So just to make sure that we call everything, because if you cannot invoke the API endpoints, then it's over, right? Like you need to be able to reach the functionality to test it, right? As I said before, with the complexity. Now, humans can figure out the required business logic and parameter combinations to invoke endpoints, but tools can't, right? And this is another example, 20K for this guy. He changed the parameters in the API request to get codes for virtually any game, regardless of ownership. And so on, right? And this was on Steam. So yeah, there's a lot of examples of this. And then remote code execution. So sometimes, well, most people will think like automated tools will catch all remote code executions, but sometimes there are subtle and easy to miss issues like this, right? So for example, this is United Airlines paid a bug bounty of 1.5 million miles to bug hunter Jordan Viens from Florida, who reported 2 remote code execution bugs, right? And this is United Airlines, right? So pretty serious. So yeah, and they likely have like a security team and everything, but they still missed it, right? So this happens like all the time. And then you have low-level vulnerabilities, right? So sometimes like you write your code, but then there's the compiler, then there's the dependencies, and then there's the whole interaction of everything working together. And sometimes this leads to some low-level problems that were unexpected, right? So you can have vulnerabilities in processors, vulnerabilities in compilers, vulnerabilities in subtle interactions between the libraries used, vulnerabilities in subtle interactions between the application and third-party components, side channel data leaks, and other problems like that. So an example of this could be the Spectre vulnerability for which these guys got like 100K, right? So yeah, there's like a lot of examples like this. And then of course there's the insecure direct object reference that, yes, technically is very simple, but the skill required to perform this is like so low that even your grandmother can do it, like changing an ID from 1 to 2 in a URL. And from a defense side, the developer has to remember, to say like, hey, can user A really see the data for user B or not, right? So a human will figure this out, a tool will struggle, and a WAF cannot stop ID 1 from ID 2, right? So a WAF just sees 2 numbers. It's not like a clear XSS, SQL injection, or something that has kind of a signature or a specific look to it, right? So insecure direct object reference go blast through like all your defenses if you have an issue like this, right? So yeah, in Australia there was an interesting case about this, so you can see it in the slides. Yeah, there's actually been like a lot of insecure direct object references. You could also see in the Norwegian tax system as well. You were able to see like some guy's data. There's been like a lot of issues with this, right? And then XSS, there's like nowadays you would expect this would be gone, but we keep finding it in pentest, right? A lot less than before, but we still find it. Especially DOM-based XSS is really tricky because it comes from the JavaScript of the application, which is normally very complex, and automated tools struggle to find DOM-based XSS. And this keeps coming up, right? So this is like another example of a vulnerability found on Mapbox and Firefox, so yeah, so there's a lot of issues like this. Then you have server-side request forgery, where automated tools will often miss this due to logic, complexity, and so on, right? It's difficult to have like an IP address on the internal network that the customer gives you to check if you can actually read stuff from the internal network and so on. But even if they find it, they will never match humans to increase impact, right? So exactly what can you do with the SSRF vulnerability? What data systems can you access, and what can attackers fetch cloud credentials or session data and stuff like this, right? So this is also another reason. Then you have memory corruption vulnerabilities, and I don't know, like I'm going over the 20 minutes. What do we do? Do we do a longer episode or
doing a longer episode? Keep going for sure.
Okay. So yeah, with memory corruption, automated tools, we have some problems, right? So dynamic analysis will at best crash the app, but fail to explain why it happened. Static analysis will at best find usage of insecure functions, but will fail to prove the issue with an exploit that actually works. And if the vulnerability is on a package used by the app, even static analysis will miss it, right? So there's a lot of problems like this, right? That with a manual pentest, you can be more likely to find this, right? And then you have multiple flaws and chain vulnerabilities. Sometimes you can have a bunch of low and medium vulnerabilities that when chained together, then you can have like a critical, right? So there's a lot of organizations that only fix bugs that have a CVSS score more than 7.5, and if not, they think it's not important. But sometimes if you chain a lot of those small things, it can lead to to a bunch of problems, right? So in this example, you have like a Starbucks vulnerability that this guy Mohammed found, and he found remote code execution, remote file inclusion, leading to phishing attacks and cross-site request forgery, right? So these vulnerabilities would enable cyber criminals to hijack your customer accounts, collect credit card details, and misuse information, right? So all this type of stuff, it requires like a human, like to chain it all together. So now let's talk a little bit about other considerations, shortcomings of automation, bug bounties, and cheap pentests, right? So what happens with automation? Automated tools have a limited understanding of context, right? So they lack the ability to interpret the contextual nuances, right? So this means a misinterpretation of potential vulnerabilities because they don't know how the business works and stuff like that, right? Then automated tools are unable to mimic human intuition, right? So lack of intuition and critical thinking against human testers means that they are prone to misjudge some scenarios, right? So not all XSSs are medium and not all SQL injections are critical. It actually depends, right? Sometimes, for example, we found a SQL injection in a pentest, but the database was empty. There was nothing there. So, okay, SQL injection is bad, but there's no impact, right? Because there's nothing you can steal. There's like nobody using the actual database where that was used, and we couldn't get remote code execution. So the impact, even though it's SQL injection, which is bad, it wasn't high, right? So automated tools will not be able to give you that context and that intuition, right? And then automated tools will struggle with novel threats, right? So they rely on predefined patterns, so they are unable to find emerging or custom and catalog threats, right? So that's also another limitation. Then other problems are that automated tools will overlook system-specific configurations, so they will be unable to adapt to unique setups, so they will miss vulnerabilities that are specific to an organization or an application. And automated tools are ineffective in complex environments, right? So they are unable to navigate intricate systems, which equals false positives and false negatives, as I explained before, right? So if you have a multi-sequence step to read something, they will not reach it, right? And then bug bounty programs can be beneficial, right? Especially like if you like first use automation to catch as much as you can, then you have a pen test, then you can, I think, consider bug bounty programs, but you should be aware that you will have a huge influx of invalid and fake submissions, right? And this also costs time and money, right? So this will result in lots of false alarms, duplicates, and non-exploitable issues, which means wasted time and effort to review and verify, right? So when people start with a bug bounty program, they say this, we will save a lot of money because the bug bounty is only going to be like 10K for all the issues that are reported, but you are not factoring in maybe the time that you will have to pay people to go through all the submissions, right? Which is going to be a lot. And when you factor that in, maybe bug bounty is not for you, right? So you have to consider everything or pilot the solution and measure like what it is actually costing you, right? And then there's also the elevated workload for the development teams, right? So you have to sort through the high volume of bug reports, which means a slowdown on progress on development tasks, right? So if you have developers like taking a lot of bug reports, then that's time not spent in development, right? So this is also something to consider. And then you have an increased resource allocation for review and verification. You get the bug report, but then you have to validate it. There's going to be a lot of bug reports, so this means lots of resources, tools, and technologies to check reports and high costs, right? So
we had a bug bounty program at GitGuardian 2 years ago, and we got so inundated with reports for absolute trash. You know, like things that were absolutely not relevant and probably even like automated, that we just, even if there was a relevant one, like we couldn't find it. It would be so hard to find through all the trash. So we shut the program down because we didn't want someone issuing a real bug and us not responding.
I mean, that's the problem that popped up. Beg bounty of people that are trying to make a living by saying, hey, we found these threats, and you can go find like multiple reports of people doing the exact same email to a just list of companies. It makes
big bounty. I like that.
Yeah, big bounty. It makes it look, the entire industry kind of look creepy and weird. That like, hey, we're not holding you hostage, but and I think that's the problem that I think pen testing in general seems to need to overcome. In the eyes of not security people. Security people understand the value here, and I think most of our audience is like, yes, but how do you and not to jump ahead to questions, but how do you get around this limitations when you're talking to clients? Like if they throw this in your face and like, well, what? Yeah, just how do you address this on a business sense?
Yeah, this is the problem with bug bounties, right? But so this is the reason why you need a manual pen test, because the manual pen test gives you like the findings of humans testing your application, which have been validated internally. There's a QA process by the pen test company, whoever they are, and then you get real findings without the fake findings that tools will give you, right? So that's the value of the manual pen test, right? This is what the entire talk is about. And you avoid like all the huge load of having your team to go through fake findings, because in the pen test report you only get real findings, right? It's not an automated report, it's a real report written by humans, right? So this is why I'm talking here about bug bounties, because sometimes people think that this will replace a pen test, but I'm actually explaining here why that's not the case. And actually, regarding what you're saying, what you said about that you had to shut down your bug bounty program because you got so many bug bounty requests. Another anecdote that I can share is that a very well-known company that everybody listening knows about, that I will not mention just because I'm nice. I talked to their internal security team, very big company, very well-known. They have a person to filter out the initial bug bounty submissions. And this person normally, in their experience, burns out in about 6 months, and then they put another person, right? So the entire job of this person is to stop the bullshit bug bounty submissions so that they do not reach the expensive security team from this big company that I will not mention, but everybody knows about. And that's kind of the process they have, right? So this person burns out, and then they put another one, and it lasts. This other person lasts another 6 months, and then they burn out, and then they put another one, right? That's what they do, like to filter it out. But even then, they still get a lot of bullshit submissions. The security team, and they say like, they joke like, now I can distinguish between Indian and Pakistani music. But even when they are reviewing the submissions, right? Sometimes they get, for example, a YouTube video or something like that, and they have to review this, and then they realized, like after spending like so much time going through all this, that they faked the vulnerability using burp, for example, right? That they have like an auto replay something, and then like you change the HTML and you fake the XSS that wasn't there, and then in the video it seems there's XSS, but there's actually no XSS, right? So as the security team is trying to debug this, is all a complete waste of time. It's just someone trying to gain money for a fake vulnerability, right? So you have to factor that in. Okay, let's keep moving because I have a few more slides. So there's other limitations are the reduced efficiency due to high noise to signal ratio, right? So you have, in most bug bounties, you will have a lot of bullshit submissions compared to a few useful or valid reports, right? Because what you are really interested about is the few useful and valid reports. So this means that the valuable reports can get buried in the noise and can be missed, right? Just because you don't have like the capacity to like flick through all this, right? And then there's the escalated overall program cost, right? The combination of the increased workload, resource allocation, reduced efficiency due to the high noise to signal ratio means higher overall cost, right? So you have to factor that in if you want to implement a bug bounty program. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying you have to be aware of the real cost, right? And I'm also not saying you shouldn't use automation. You should use automation, but you should be aware of the limitations of it, right? So, so we went through all this, and then let's talk a little bit about the cheap pen test, right? So sometimes people try to go for the cheapest pen test, right? But think about it, right? If you were going to have heart surgery, would you choose the cheapest surgeon, or would you choose the best surgeon you can find? Right? Just think about it, right? It's heart surgery. It's like life or death, right? So would you buy cheap or would you buy best, right? So with security, it's a little bit like that as well, right? So yeah, you can buy a cheap pen test, but what is going to happen, right? It will not be. Let me see if I have. Yeah. So there's a few likely scenarios of why the pen test is cheap, right? So the pen test might be very cheap, especially for companies that call a pen test what is not a pen test, right? So this is why I put this in quotes. When they just copy paste the output of an automated tool, then yeah, the pen test is cheap, but it's because it's not a pen test. It's like the copy and paste of an automated tool. So then you have the false positives and false negatives that we talked about before. they will often use less skilled professionals, right? So you have guaranteed false positives and false negatives because maybe they put somebody that is fresh out of university, or somebody that is just an intern that is like learning or whatever. So they are cheaper, and that's why they can sell you the pen test for less money, but the quality is going to suffer, right? So this means actually an increased business risk, right? Because you get the cheap pen test, yes, but this is going to mean low-hanging fruit vulnerabilities, which means like vulnerabilities that are really easy to find. Like we actually had some pen tests from customers that actually one of their own customers was using the application and they got pissed off because they found somebody else's data, right? And then they got really annoyed, like, if I can see somebody else's data, they can also see my data. So your system is bullshit. You should pen test this, right? And then, so this is one of the scenarios where sometimes we get customers this way, right? Where, there's like an internal motivation, like, hey, we have to do something about this. It's not right that, or even like regular users are finding vulnerabilities, right? So this would be an example of low-hanging fruit vulnerabilities if even a normal user can find it, right? And then you have a loss of customer trust, right? So imagine the scenario that I just mentioned of the pissed off customer that finds out they can see other people's data. So this means brand damage, right? So they will not trust you as more, and they might not talk very well about you. And then you have possible regulatory penalties and the possible scenario that you will likely get hacked, right? Because like you get the cheap pen test to pay less for the pen test, and you check the box, I had a pen test, yes, but it's really not a pen test. So, you will likely get hacked. It's actually like a complete waste of money, right? Because you have the false positives, false negatives, and all these like potential problems, right? So let's talk about a case study, right? So like, show me the data, right? Let's talk like talking theories here. So we had this customer, right? So these are the 3 directly exploitable vulnerabilities. Normally in our reports, we split findings in 2 sections. One is the identified vulnerabilities, which are like directly exploitable issues, right? So issues that we see like a logged in user or an authenticated attacker would be able to exploit directly without any sort of computer access or anything like that, right? And then we have another section that we call hardening recommendations, which are not directly exploitable issues, but are things that would improve security, right? Like using security headers, using like cookie flag, things like that would be more like hardening recommendation in most cases, as opposed to a directly exploitable issue, right? Or like using like weak ciphers, things like that, right? Like most of the time, you will not get hacked that way. It's going to be like something else, right? So in this case, this is the first pen test we ever did for them. So we found 3 issues: 1 medium, 1 low, and 1 high. So possible phishing through open redirect, HTML injection, and a man in the middle with invalid certificates, right? So that was the first pen test iteration. In the second pen test iteration, we only found 2 issues, right? So this is a customer that takes security very seriously. So everything we reported to them, they fixed, even the hardening recommendations. So this second time, we found a lot less issues. For the identified vulnerabilities, instead of 3, we got 2. Now, we got a little bit lucky with this one, which was like new functionality, so we still found a critical. But you can see the other one was only low, right? And then the third pen test, we found nothing, right? Everything was like hardening recommendations, right? So we found like 0 directly exploitable vulnerabilities. And you don't have to take my word for this. You can talk to any pen tester and ask them, what happens if you have a web application that you test every year after the 3rd or 4th time you have pen tested this for a client that actually fixes the issue, right? And they'll tell you the struggle, they have nightmares about it, right? They don't know what else to try. And it's like super frustrating for the auditors, right? Because it gets like extremely difficult. You have to be like super creative. So the curve to find security problems like goes like exponentially up, right? The more you pen test something, the harder and harder it gets, because like a lot more things have been tried and then have been fixed, right? So every time you pen test something, if everything is fixed as well as the developers can, it gets like so much tougher to find anything there, right? So yeah, this is like a case study from our own clients, but you can actually confirm this with any pen tester and they will tell you the same. right? They'll tell you like pen testing a website or a mobile app or whatever that has been audited like more than 3 times is typically a nightmare, and it's going to be like a struggle to find anything, right? So let's do a summary of this, right? So pentest iteration 1, we found 3 directly exploitable vulnerabilities. The second iteration, we found 2. The third, we found nothing that was directly exploitable. So is regular pentesting valuable? Any pentester will tell you 100% yes, if they fix the issues, of course. Like sometimes you have customers that they don't fix anything, or they fail to fix a lot of things. So in that case, I mean, the developers have to do their work, right? But if the customer fixes the problems, this is like super valuable, because it will become increasingly hard to find anything in an app that is regularly pen tested and patched, right? So this is the important part, that it is actually patched as well. So let's do some final thoughts and then maybe some questions. So affordable pen tests, quote unquote, rely on automated tools and miss high and critical issues. The real test cost that you should factor in includes consequences from missed vulnerabilities, so false negatives, right? So issues that are serious but will be missed by any sort of cheap pen test. You will have false alarms, right? So false positives because of the automated copy-pasted quote-unquote findings that are like fake findings, right? So this is wasted effort for your team, because you will have to pay people to go through that. Whereas skill testers will provide you with accurate insights, true findings, and prioritize remediation efforts effectively, right? So in the conclusion, normally we provide like a summary, like, okay, given of what we found, we think like these are the most important areas for you to focus on to improve security, right? So if we find a lot of access control type issues, we'll say you really have to look at access control. You have to like to centralize your security controls, have like a front controller that, you know, automates like central, you just have like a central point that enforces all your security right in one place, as opposed to have a lot of ifs in different files that is like a mess to maintain, right? So things like that. And then comprehensive tests will drive proactive security strategies that work. And then investing in quality audits improves defenses and ensures resilient operations, right? So manual testing is vital for uncovering complex vulnerabilities missed by automation, and automation complements but does not replace expert security audits, right? So I am not saying you should not use automation. I'm saying you should be aware of the limitations of automation and use an expert security audit on top of it, right? So just to be clear. And yeah, with that, we have time for questions, and we set up a few discounts here. Well, this actually another announcement. So we extended the free pentest contest deadline until the end of January. So if anybody is interested in a free pentest, this is a completely free pentest, no strings attached. You get a pentest for $0, basically, right? So you can go here to the 70security.com/blog, and you will see the free pentest contest, and you can apply there to see if you win the free pentest. But this is like completely free, right? So this will cost you absolutely nothing. Then if you don't make it to the free pentest, there's another another discount. So we called it Sec Repo 1000 for 100 off your next pentest, if you're interested on that. And then there's a 40% of any training course that we called Sec Repo 40. And there's a link here, store70security.com/discount/SecRepo40. So we can maybe share those. But if you're just interested in the free stuff, we actually have a lot of nice workshops. So you can go to 70security.com/free, and there's a few free reports and free workshops. So the free reports are more about, you know, like different reasons of things to look for when you hire a mobile pen test, or where you hire web pen test, what to look for and stuff like that, and that is all free. And then there's also workshops, right? So the workshops are about, I think there's one on practical mobile app attacks by example that is like 4 hours, it's completely free. Then there's another one for deep links and XSS on mobile apps that is also free, that is, I think, more than an hour. And then there's another one about web security, and another one about desktop app security. The desktop app security workshops is about Electron apps. So these are apps written in JavaScript that work in your desktop computer. And yeah, and that's all I have. So maybe if you have some thoughts or questions, go ahead. I'm done with the slides now.
We'll put all those links and codes in the show notes, so you can just scroll down. If you're trying to copy it off the screen right now, don't worry, they will be in the show notes when we go. Yeah, I have a couple of questions about pen test. The size of the company, like how big of a company should you be looking at to start doing a pen test? And are all pen tests the same for every typical size of company? So if you're a small startup, let's say you've got 20 people, should you start looking at a pen test? Is this something you should wait, or what's your view on for smaller companies?
This is a very good question, and actually we do a lot of pen tests for startups. So normally, yes, they will have like lower budgets, but you can still get like a decent pen test, right? So what we try to do is, we say, like the proper time to look at this would be 5 days, but if you can pay for 3, we will do our best, and something like that, right? So we always try to find a balance like that. But I'm not sure that there's a limit, because we've had startups even that are like 1 or 2 people, and we've done a pen test for them, right? Because they maybe had a mobile app that had actually, there was like a relatively strong requirement because they were handling like health data and stuff. So yeah, they're a startup, but they need like some security validation. Normally, in most startups, the 2 main drivers that we see is they are either shooting for compliance, so they need the pen test, right, for ISO 27001 or for SOC 2, or they have an investor or a stakeholder that is asking, hey, how secure is this? Like, can we get in trouble if we start like marketing this without actually testing the security of it, right? And yeah, I would say if you are a startup and you are like short on budget, you should still try, at least like once a year, or maybe if you cannot afford it once a year, do it once every 2 years or something like that, to try to save a bit of money if you are like struggling for budget. And then you can also try what I'm saying, like trying to find a compromise, like, yeah, maybe for this scope, we would need like, 7 days, but what can you do with 5, right? Because we don't have more money for this, right? And then the company will do its best, right? We normally like internally try to assign always more days than the customer actually pays for, just to get more coverage and deliver more quality. That's also something that we do. But yeah, I would say that's the sort of it. I'm not sure if I went into too many tangents. I have this tendency, so if I
No,
feel free to keep going.
No, that's the gist of it, right? Because I think a lot of companies just think they're too small to worry about this. And I think people just get put off too by when they talk to big companies, or maybe you've come from a big company, right? It's very common that you were an exec in a large company and then you've gone a startup and you remember paying $200,000 a year in pen test, right? That's not going to necessarily be the scenario for a startup. So I think people just kind of feel, like, depending on that.
Another approach that people or companies like struggling for budget can use is like try to use as much as you can from free automation tools first, and then you do the pen test, right? Because what will happen is with the automation, yes, you will have a lot of false positives and false negatives, but this can also be like education for your developer team, because now your developer team has to go through the bullshit findings and learn about XSS and other things, so they will know more. Maybe they will stop some of the low-hanging fruits, and then when you have the real pen test, the report will have like more interesting findings as opposed to like super easy to find things, right? Which pen test companies also appreciate, that they don't have to report like 200 XSXs or something like that, right? So yeah, that's also like another approach, right? So try to leverage automation as much as you can until you have a budget, but eventually you need the manual audit for the reasons explained during this like brief presentation, because there's limitations, right, on that. So eventually you'll have to have a manual audit, and you just have to try to, select the best vendor you can with the budget you have, and do the best with that, right? As always, there's compromises. So
I'm curious on especially repeat customers, because it's something I'm heard from every pen tester I've ever talked to is like they'll go back a year later and basically make the exact same report. Like, how do you encourage the customer to actually act on what you found? Is there a way? Or is that a hard line? Is like, here's your recommendations. We'll come back when you need us, or is it like, hey, I'm going to follow up with you and let's prod you along? At what point is it your responsibility versus not?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all down to the customer, right? They're paying for the audit, we're doing the audit, we're delivering the results, and then what they do on their end is their business, right? Who are we to judge, right? But yeah, it's not ideal by any means. I also don't feel it's a good use of money if you pay an auditing company, they give you the findings, and then you do nothing with them. But we actually had a case about this. So what we did is just highlighted in the report, right? In the intro and in the conclusion, it was almost at the very top. Like, hey, 76% of the findings in this report are items from the previous audit. You should do something about this. It's to improve your security, right? So there's not much more that you can do than that. Like just try to highlight it a little bit more and talk to
Like
them. And then sometimes there's also like complexities in the organization because maybe the developers want to fix it, but the management doesn't give them the budget, right? So there's like the internal politics going on as well. It's not always like the developers are bad or anything like that. It's like maybe they don't have the budget. Maybe the boss doesn't let them do that because there's other priorities that have to be finished by next month, whatever. And that's their business. I mean, if they paid for the audit, we deliver the audit. That's the end of it for us. Well, actually, we don't just do the audits. What we do is, I think this is important to mention as well, because sometimes a lot of people expect like the pentest company leaves you in the dark during the audit, then they give you the report and then they say bye, right? So we are like strongly against this form of pen testing. And what we do instead is we provide the customer with interim findings during the test, because then we have feedback. So I'll give you a couple of examples that I normally give to potential customers. So we found, for example, a very cool Stripe payment bypass in a pen test. And we reported this during the pen test, way before the final report was sent. As we found it, like we cleaned it up, did a bit of QA, and we sent it to the customer, the interim finding. And then they said, this is a very cool attack, and we like it, but it would never work in production because we have this security, like different setup, and you're testing on staging, and it's just working because you're testing on staging. This would never work in production. So we had a finding that we thought was critical. That was info, right? It was like just hardening, like hey, you can improve this, but actually in production it would never work. And we also had the opposite, right? We reported something as medium during the test, and the customer tells us, no, this is critical. Like, I don't want other customers to be able to see this data. This in our business, this is like no go, right? And you get this business context that would be impossible for the auditing team who are technical to get from the business, right? So this interaction during the pen test is actually critical because sometimes you get business feedback that you would never get, right? If you just give them the report at the end with your technical background without any business feedback, then you don't know, right? So this is why this interaction during the test is very important. Then we send them the report. And then after the report, we give them some time. Some customers take a month. Other customers fix everything before the end of the pen test. And other customers take a year. It doesn't matter. Whenever they are ready, we also do the fix verification for free, right? So we don't leave the customer like alone with the pen test and bye. We say, okay, when you're ready, when you fixed everything, we'll just take another look and we will confirm like if we can find any bypasses to your fixes or if your fixes are good. And then if the fixes are good, normally they are interested in a letter of attestation, which is normally what is shown to investors and stakeholders and stuff like that. Some sort of document that says like, this was pen tested and all the security problems were fixed. And we verified that there's no bypasses to the fixes. And we consider this to be ready to be used in production, right? So yeah, to give you a little bit more background.
Well, I could go on forever, but we are coming to the top of the hour, so I think we better wrap up. But I think anyone listening and watching surely should definitely be considering a pen test by now, and if they're not, then well, I guess they weren't paying attention. But Abraham, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. And before I click the big red button, any final words there, Dwayne?
No, I just want to say thanks again. And for those of you out in the audience that have not checked out OWTF, go check that out. I highly recommend, not to discredit anything or not to diminish anything about the pen testing we talked about today, but I think that builds onto it. Like if you were looking for the open source to start with, there you go. Start reading there would be my advice. So thanks again for making that project happen. And thanks for all the knowledge you shared with us today about pen testing.
Thank you. I hope it was entertaining and useful for somebody.